Hey everyone, my name is Tonya Parham. I'm the founder of Like It Marketing and the host of this show, Like Being Social, where each month I interview a business owner to get to know a little bit more about their story, as well as hopefully get them to inspire you and teach you something new. So this is our 10th episode of Like Being Social, and I'm super excited to have a guest on our show who actually specializes in something that you may not have heard of before. So Victoria Hadley is the owner of VH Editorial Services, and she considers herself a business editor. I'm not going to go into it. I'm actually going to let her explain the details to you. So Victoria, thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Hi, Tonya. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Absolutely. Well, tell me, I want you to get into that a little bit more. Like, what is a business editor? Tell me about your story and how you got to where you are today.
Of course, thank you. Really, business editing is like what you would think of as like book editing, but just for businesses and business owners. Obviously, something like a book is going to sound a lot different than a lead magnet, and a lead magnet is going to sound different than an email marketing campaign. So all of these little things go into convincing your clients to work with you. And so really business editing helps you put that best foot forward of like everything's polished, everything makes sense, you're speaking to the right audience and to the right people in the right way. Because like I said, there's so much that goes into it, and like even a YouTube video should sound different than a podcast episode and just little things like that. But I actually got into this because I was an assistant at a home health care company.
Okay.
And they knew I wanted to be an editor, and I was studying editing while in college. And so they were like, well, great. We love help with our marketing materials that are going out to people because we've noticed like mistakes and typos. And then it became this whole deal of like, I was suddenly editing all of the marketing documents across the company, trying to make them look and sound the same so that we had a cohesive brand that people were like, yes, this is this home healthcare company, and nobody's going to mistake it for somebody else.
Absolutely. And it's nice to have like that second pair of eyes on your work because, some
Absolutely.
have typos and you really have looked at it too long, right? So you kind of need a second
Right.
person to look at it for you. So that's really cool. I love what you do and how unique it is. So
Thank you.
my second question for you is, seeing as video content is becoming like really popular right now, I want to know like what your advice is and like what approach you would have for writing a video script as a business owner.
So I think there's two things to think about when you're writing a video script. One is how much of the information you aren't going to know off the top of your head.
Mhm.
So for instance, as a pastime for myself, I do true crime videos, and I have to write out very detailed scripts, like every sentence I intend to say, because there's so many little details that I have to have right. But if I was going to do a video for an editing topic, I could probably just say something like semicolon use 1 and 2, and then know that I need to talk about what semicolons are, and then these are the 2 ways to use them, that sort of thing. And then my second tip would be that really try to say out loud what you're thinking before you write it down. So something that you're going to write and have read as a written document is going to sound a lot different and should sound a lot different than like a video script.
Oh yeah.
Because in a video, you want to get to know somebody. They are watching you. They want you to be personable and to be yourself, really. And you should be a little bit more casual. Like, I'm not saying you have to go super crazy and use a ton of slang. I probably recommend against that. But it also helps to be yourself and to be comfortable. And so if you're reading off something that you intended to be written, it's going to sound a lot more stiff coming out of your mouth, because like I don't write the same way I talk, and I don't think anybody does.
No.
So that's a huge difference that I think is something that I learned early on, of like, okay, my writing is very elaborate and flowery, and
Yeah.
that doesn't always translate well to a video. It just sounds heavy and like you're trying too hard, honestly.
Absolutely. And maybe, like you said, I like that idea of like saying it out loud before you write it down,
Mm,
and maybe even just record yourself, right, on your phone or something,
right.
and then take that and have it transcribed or whatever. So it makes it super simple for you to have that script. So
Exactly. Dictation or talk to text, either of those would be a great option of then you're also getting out a lot of the ideas at the same time too, and not worrying about sorting through which one is right because you're just talking it out in the moment.
exactly. I love that. I love it. I love that you do true crime stuff too. I think that's so perfect since this is like an October, Life Being Social episode. So it's kind of
Right.
perfect for this time of year.
Oh, that is perfect. I'm glad it all tied together.
It does for sure. So tell me, I want to get into social media a little bit. So what would you say are some common mistakes that you find in social media post captions?
So I was thinking about this, and the biggest thing is typos. Just like if you're it feels like a low stakes type situation. It is one of the lower stakes. People forgive mistakes on social media. It happens, it's bound to. But especially for like brands, this is your first interaction with a lot of people. So you really want to try to make sure it is polished.
Mhm.
But very specifically, one thing that I see is lack of capitalization and punctuation.
Yeah.
And while it isn't always essential if you're just doing like a quick selfie with like a quick caption, it's totally understandable to write that in all lowercase and just throw it in there. If you are trying to write a longer length piece, we're trained to look for capital letters and punctuation to tell us where our sentences are going and where we should follow along. And so if you lose that, you're going to start tripping up your readers and kind of even confusing them a little bit.
I could see.
Um, and then probably the most common one is than versus then.
Oh,
It's something I see all the time, very common,
no.
of then being like, I did this, then this, so a measurement of time,
Mhm.
versus than, which is comparison. Like I'd rather go to the store than do the dishes.
Yes, that or like the two, like two, two, and two. I see
Yep.
that common mistake. Weather, like.
Yes.
It's
And,
silly.
there, and there. That's a really just the different ones that are pretty common. Some of them have even become memes of people being like, oh, I know the difference between there, and there. And like, it's funny, even I mess it up. Like, it's
Oh,
bound to happen.
yeah, every now and then. That's why you need a business editor, though, right? A second pair of eyes
Exactly.
to look over those
It's
things.
so easy to just like tune out what you're getting wrong. You know what it's supposed to say. And especially if you're in a rush, you're like reading it, you're like, yep, good to go, post. And then all of a sudden you look back a couple hours later and you're like, wow, that didn't make as much sense as I hoped it would.
Right. That's why I love like Facebook gives you the option to like edit your post caption, stuff like that. Cause sometimes I'll notice like a typo and I'm like, oh gosh, I have to go in there really quick and edit it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So that's and then I also use like a scheduling software for my posts, and it kind of does,
Mhm.
like some of the editing for me, like it points out typos and things of that nature. So that's kind of like my second pair of eyes. But that actually gets me into my next question, which is what
Right.
are your thoughts on using like software like Grammarly versus hiring an actual business editor to proofread your work?
So Grammarly really became big when I was in college, and it's funny because I worked in a writing center, and so people were like, I'd rather just use Grammarly than like waste my time coming to the writing center and like sitting down with somebody. And I definitely think Grammarly is a great tool, especially in business. So I've done book editing as well, and it was something I always told my book editing clients, like, it's a good proofreader, don't use it for your editing.
Right.
But, and so that's kind of the same thing in business, but on a lesser scale. Like, I definitely recommend using it for social media posts. That's a great way to get them looked over, just for like typos or little things that are going to trip people up, or even emails just to your clients, everyday emails that'll keep that level of professionalism up a little bit. Not that I think, not like I use exclamation points and like, I'm like, hey girl, what's up? In emails to my clients. But I also, especially as an editor, I don't want to have typos in those emails. So it's definitely something that I'm like, okay, I want to use Grammarly really quick. Just check me over, because even editors need editors. Like, everybody messes stuff up.
Yes.
But I think that where Grammarly kind of advertises itself, but able to do this, but isn't, is give you that human feedback of being like, okay, as someone who's not super familiar with this, I don't really know what this means. Is that going to be a problem for you? So for instance, if you're writing a blog post that's intended for expert level people, then me not understanding something as someone not in that field isn't a huge deal. Like, it's kind of like everybody should know this at this point, but it's something to keep in mind. Versus if you're talking to a beginner in your blog post and someone like me who comes in from the outside and says, okay, I don't know what SEO is, or I don't know how a Facebook ad works, or I don't know how this works. Like, those are all little things that are going to add up and actually help you expand and reach the correct audience. And so I think that that's something that Grammarly just can't do. It can't give you that human reading it and being like, okay, here's where I'm tripping up. Here's where this doesn't make sense. Because honestly, there are times whenever I'm like, this is technically right the way you wrote it, but nobody says this. Like, nobody talks like this. And so nobody's going to understand it.
Exactly. I love that, especially with like my clients and the people I'm trying to reach. Like, sometimes I have to get out of my head and remember that like these people don't necessarily know what SEO means or anything like that. So I think it's cool that you have that human touch that something like Grammarly wouldn't. So I think that's especially important for people who are posting on social media, for instance, because a lot of their people are going to be beginners. So you make a great point with that. So my next question to you is, what's something that you see business owners not consider in terms of like readability when it comes to their content, with like creating the content and designing it?
Yeah, so this is something that I think if you've studied design, may be something that somebody's familiar with, because it's that term accessibility that people are trying to do, like using captions on your videos or including a transcript or different things like that can help. But one thing that a lot of people don't know that I knew growing up, because my brother is colorblind. And so there are certain colors that if you put them together, he cannot see. It all blends together. He can't read it. He can't understand it. And so, for instance, I saw KFC, a massive company, made a website that was a red background with white text. I could barely read it as someone who isn't colorblind, just like looking at it, super hard to see. It's really hard to look at. It's going to make you strain really hard. And it's way too bright with that, like, KFC red just glaring you in the face. But someone like my brother, who's colorblind, literally can't see the words on the page.
Wow.
So it is just totally unable to, like, we would have to either print it out and make it like black and white for him to see, or someone has to read it to him. And so, especially with like Instagram graphics or social media posts, and then so I use Canva all the time. I design stuff all on my own. And I really have to think about that of like, okay, if I put white text on a blue background, will someone who's blue-green colorblind be able to see this?
Wow.
So I definitely think it's important to recognize that if you go super crazy with the colors and designs you're using, that you may totally block out an entire group of your audience. And this is especially true if you are marketing to men, Men are mostly colorblind. It's very rare for women to be colorblind. So if your group that you're trying to reach are men, I would definitely recommend sticking to black and white text backgrounds, just to avoid the issue completely.
And I'm glad that you bring this up because, like with marketing and website marketing in particular, you can actually get fined for not being ADA compliant on your website. Yeah, there's like
Oh, wow.
some people will actually sue other companies for not having their website set up to be ADA compliant. So that's super, super important. Obviously, you don't want to get fined.
Wow.
And obviously, you want to be able to reach as many people as possible and not lose anybody out. So it's funny because when I actually was creating the brand colors and stuff for Like It Marketing, my colors were very light. My web designer had told me about some of the laws and regulations when it comes to website design and ADA, and she actually changed my colors of Like It Marketing and made them like way more vibrant, and out there,
Right.
yeah, than what they were before. So I'm glad that you bring that up. I think that's really important, and a lot of people don't consider that.
Well, that's what you mentioned. I didn't even know on top of that. So even just so there's definitely multiple levels to think about in terms of making sure that you are being accessible. And if all of your content that you're trying to get out there to people, like TikToks and Instagram Reels and YouTube videos, if all of the content that you're using to try to reach people is mostly video, use a closed captioning service. There's Rev, there is Descript is one that you can even get, like, you can even edit your videos in Descript now, and they will have a transcript that you can edit the video from. Like, you can delete words off the transcript and it'll delete that section out of the video. So those are really great tools to be able to get things for people who are, maybe deaf and can't watch your videos and understand them, or for people who just, like, I had a friend in college who was half deaf. So like you could talk to him in a conversation, but if we were watching TV, if you didn't want the volume to be at 100, you had to turn the closed captions on. So there are just lots of like little things you can do to make yourself more widely available. And I think that that's the world we should be moving into. That's what you should be doing. Like you said, you want to reach the most people possible, but I also think that there's a lot to be said of just being empathetic to people who can't reach you without that extra help.
Exactly. And another thing with the captions on your content, especially like when it comes to reels and video content and things like that, is I found like a statistic recently. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it basically said that the majority of people watch a video without sound, you know. So that's why it's really important to have those captions. Sometimes I even find myself, if the video doesn't have a caption, I'll scroll to the next video. So now you're missing out on a whole potential audience who won't even watch videos that don't have captions on it,
Right. Like, I don't like watching TV with captions on. I get distracted super easily. I was just recently diagnosed with ADHD. So it was like, people are always like, well, you're just a slow reader. And I'm like, no, I read quickly. I just can't focus on anything else when there's words scrolling across the bottom.
Yeah, I doubt you'd be a slow reader with you being an editor too.
Right.
Would be kind of with that.
That was always my family thought that was hysterical. They're like, no, trust me, she's not a slow reader.
No, not at all.
I definitely find myself with Instagram Reels and TikToks. I listen to them without sound sometimes, or watch them without sound. And so if something doesn't have a caption, I'll flip past 5 of them until I get to one that does have a caption if I'm just sitting there. So I think that's a great point to make too, is that, these little things that don't seem like a big deal all the time will add up over the long run and really get you out to people.
Exactly. So my next question for you is, do you feel like there's content where it's more acceptable to like be casual and maybe have a few mistakes in it?
Yes, definitely. I think I kind of touched on this earlier. Social media posts. I mean, I have graphics that I've put mistakes in before, and someone's like, can you fix this? And I'm like, no, it's up now. I'd have to delete the whole post. Like, thank you so much. Oops. But definitely like social media captions aren't a huge deal. I would say that like graphics, make sure those are right, from my own experience.
Yes,
Because
that's
some people
the
don't even
worst.
get to your caption. They just see the graphic, and if that's the first thing they see is a mistake, you're just like, oh, whatever, and
Yeah,
keep
may make a
scrolling.
bad impression on that company if
Right.
they're not professional or they don't take the time to like review those things and put in
Absolutely.
quality work. So yeah, I know I've been there where you've been, where I like accidentally like did a typo or something in a graphic, and I was like, now I have to delete this entire post because unfortunately you can't
Right.
just change, you know, the graphic and post it. Like that's not a thing. You have to completely delete it, and then you're gonna lose your analytics. So.
Absolutely. And that was the thing. Like, nobody mentioned it until it'd been like, I think 12 hours. So I already had multiple likes on the post and some interaction. And I was like, it's got to stay now. I don't know what to tell you. I was like, thank you for pointing it out. I super appreciate it, but I can't fix it.
Right?
Um, and then I would say that like emails just back and forth between your clients, those aren't something like Grammarly is more than enough to keep them clean and understandable. Not really something that, is going to make or break if you misspell something. Like they're not going to think less of you for that.
Right.
But I will say that something to keep in mind is that one of the recommendations that government agencies make to keep an eye out for scamming and phishing companies are typos and grammar mistakes in
Interesting.
emails and things like that. So while these are more low stake situations, you also don't want to constantly be having mistakes and sounding off and things like that, because that is something that they say constantly. They're like, does this sound like, and I don't want to say specifically like a native English speaker, because obviously people who aren't English speakers can own companies and be very successful.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with it, but it is one of the things that they warn people about in phishing scams, because oftentimes there is someone from another country or a non-English speaking country writing these.
Yeah.
So it's like typos, grammar mistakes, saying words that just don't quite sound right. Those are all red flags for these types of scams. So it's really important to make sure that your main content, like your website, your lead magnets, your blog posts, and things like that, are clean and aren't going to set off any red flags. Whereas, like, social media posts and just individual emails back and forth, I wouldn't worry about that if I was someone receiving it. But maybe if I signed up for in my very first email that I know is going to be that automated email that's sent out, has a bunch of typos in it, like that may be a red flag for me that I'd be looking for. So that's just something to keep in mind, is like casual client emails aren't such a big deal, but the emails that you're sending out in mass that are part of your marketing campaigns that are trying to be, when they need to be formal, like make sure that they are cleaned up and ready to go, because those are going to be the ones that set off red flags for people. Even just like you said, feeling like someone didn't care enough to look at it. Someone didn't care enough to put the time in to read it, because then they're going to wonder, well, will you care enough when you're working on the deliverables that you're going to give me?
Exactly. That's a really good point. Thank you for that. So, my next question, my final question for you is, how can we actually reach you to learn a little bit more, maybe hire you for this service?
So the best place to get a hold of me is through my website. I have all of the contact information and a way to book consultations at vheditorialservices.com. And you can also reach me through Instagram at vh.editorialservices. And so those are really the best ways to reach me. My email gets junked up a lot, so if I'm not looking for client emails, I may miss it. So it's best to go through the website or Instagram to get a hold of me.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead. I'll make sure that I include Victoria's information in the show notes. That way you guys can go and follow her, email her, or, go to her website and things like that. So aside from that, if you guys did like this show, which Victoria, I'm really appreciative of just, all of the information that you gave us. I took a lot of notes that I'll be including in the show notes as well. Thank you for being here. But just to the viewers, if you like this, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. You can follow us on Like It Marketing LLC. That's the handle. And go to www.likeitmarketing.com. Thanks again, Victoria, for being here. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you guys for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.